advantage of it because their families are too poor to pay for the incidentals. The room, the board, the internet, the computers, the books, the transportation back and forth, drinking beer on a Friday night, whatever it is, their family is too poor. And not only that, but typically the oldest child in the family went to work at the age of 15 to be able to help to support the other siblings in the family. And consequently, that's why a lot of Latin American families, it's the younger children who get to go to university and not the eldest. Now, some of these students try and get by flipping hamburgers or being a night clerk at a hotel or stuff like that, but that doesn't pay very much money and is typically not what they're going to university for. And so they work for a few times and then they drop out. And I knew one young woman, it was painful. She was within 2 courses of getting her bachelor's degree in computer science, and she said, I just can't do it anymore, and she dropped out. Very painful. So I started thinking about how could I get students to be able to work on a part-time job that would generate enough money that they would be able to pay for these incidentals. And the part-time job, we figured out, would be about 21 hours a week, which meant that typically the students would have to go for another year, 5 years instead of 4, to get all of their courses in. But they would be learning not only how to apply their computer science degrees, but also learning a little bit about business, how to run their own company, how to do marketing, how to determine what they needed to know for their customer and what the customer's needs were. And so that basically, by using open hardware, free software, and free data, don't forget Creative Commons, they would be able to create solutions to sell to these customers. Okay. We'll talk about a few of those in a moment. And they would be supplying what we in the computer industry call frontline support to the customer. How many of you have ever been on a computer support line by a telephone? How many of you have ever been on that support line for less than 20 minutes? And how many of you have actually gotten a real answer to your question? Now, back in the day, I used to work for Digital Equipment Corporation, and we had places where people could email in, or before the web, email in their problem reports and stuff like that. And I would ask business people in the audience, how many of you have ever turned in a problem report? And everybody's hands would go up because they were business people and they had problems. And I'd say, okay, all the people with hands up, how many of you ever got a well-worded workaround or fix for that problem? And now 1 or 2 hands would go down, but most of them would stay up. And I say, how many of you really got a really good answer to that? And now all the hands would go down, except one person's hand would stay up, and I say, Mr. Gates, you don't count. We need more frontline support work, not less. We're told, the cloud is going to make everything easy. No, it's not. I can prove that. But what Project Kawa is doing is taking technical people studying computer science and computer engineering and teaching them how to run their business. And more than that, coaching them in how to run their business so they are successful. Now, we've done many pilots of this, okay? And originally, we were talking about only supplying support to free software. And after we ran a couple pilots, the students came to me and said, Mr. Hall, we want to have products that we can sell. And so I sat down and I said, okay, what type of products could we make out of free software that we could take and do 99.99% of the work so that these people could pull these products down, pull the software down, put it on open source hardware, whether it be a Raspberry Pi, a BeagleBone Black, or whatever, and have it work. And One of the products I latched onto is a product called Odoo, which is a point-of-sale and ERP system. It's the same type of system that you see in Starbucks up here. You see at McDonald's. You see almost every place. It has a little printer, maybe a cash drawer. It hooks up to a card payment system. You know, it has an LCD screen and stuff. You can buy all that stuff, and you can put Odoo on there, and you can solve somebody's problem with it. Now, typically you will buy those systems from Oracle or Hewlett-Packard or something like that, and you might pay $30,000 to start, or $15,000 to start. I could do the same thing for $500. And not only that, but it's open source software. In a lot of cases, not just open source software, but free software. And we'll get more into what that means later on. And that means that if you need to have it do something else, either the student might be able to do it for you for extra money, or if the student doesn't know how to do it, they can go to an Odoo support company and get it done by paying time and materials. So Odoo is one of them, a multimedia system based on Kodi. Put it together, have a really nice multimedia system that will do way more than your smart TV from LG or anything else. And more than that, you can fix it. And more than that, you can use components from a wide variety of different companies, not just LG or whoever is putting it out. You create a secure home server and keep it in your house. Plug it into the wall, use a couple watts of electric power. You know, this is for the people that don't want to store their Social Security information or their credit card information or stuff up in the Google Cloud. Now, many of us live in the United States, and our information, our data is protected by laws and our Constitution. But if you live outside of the United States, and since I do a lot of work in Brazil, I tend to talk to people outside of the United States, you find out that there are certain acts that say, oh yeah, you're protected, mad dog, but they're not. And we can listen to your conversation because they're not, okay? And that's a problem. And it's a problem that they can't store their data. You know, if they're storing it in the cloud, they can't make sure that it's being stored outside of the United States. Now, let me say at this point, I love my country, okay? You may hear me say things, you say, Mad Dog, you don't like your country. No, I love my country. I want my country to be perfect. And unfortunately, it's not. So, getting that out of the way, then a lot of you are aware of the Fediverse and social media, social constructs and stuff like that that can replace things like Facebook and new Twitter and all these other things. And they're all free and open source software. And you could take the Fediverse and put it on top of this secure home server and actually make a community server that would help out in lots of different ways. Now, I gave a talk, complete talk on Project Cowa last year here at Scale, and like I said, it's up on the web, you can watch it. But here are some of the updates this last year. We've had the Home Assistant I/O to this to be able to allow people to go in and set up home automation. Now you say, well, Mad Dog, you know, it might be really expensive to do that, and so part of our counseling to the students would be, don't necessarily pick mom and pop as your customers for this. Pick the people up that have homes up in Bel Air who money is no object. And you say, we're going to go in, we're going to help you design your house, we're going to help you install your house, and we'll be doing it with free and open source software. And they'll say, okay, here's a couple $100,000, go to it. But instead of you having to share that money with Hewlett-Packard or Oracle or some other thing, you'll be able to stick that money in your pocket. We've also extended the program from university students down to high school students. And the reason for that is that we want to have the high school students know how to do this before they leave for college. Because they'll probably be changing their address at that point, And what they want to do is to be able, as soon as they get to the university and get settled in, they want to be able to take over customers from the graduating class who have already done it. And they want to be able to give the same level of support to the customers of the students who are now leaving to go off to do whatever they want to do, but yet the freshmen coming in will know the system, so they'll be able to take over. So we're moving down into the last 2 years of high school to start this. And we're going to be implementing this through LPI's program of Linux clubs. Now, why do we have Linux clubs? It's because if you're talking to a high school in a lot of places, the high school already has its classes set up. They have certification of their classes and things like that from the Board of Education or whatever. If they disturb that, that means they have to go through certification again. But a club, you can teach all of this stuff to them, and you don't have to get any approval from the Board of Education. All you need is a mentor, a faculty member who's willing to go along and supervise it. And I now have an engaged website developer who's an amazing website developer and can typically develop a website in a day or two that most people would take a month or two. We've got all of the information together for that. He's going to start next week. We hope to have everything done by April the 18th, which is the Linux Fest Northwest, where we'll have the announcement and show it off. So now we come to the latter part of the talk, where we're going to have fun. We have an answer for oligarchy. I was talking to a gentleman earlier before you all came in about having local businesses, local people doing stuff. And so an extension to Project Kawa is an answer to oligarchy. Instead of having one company that has 1 million employees, we're going to have 1 million companies that have 1 or 2 employees. And they're not going to have any middle management. There's not going to be any middle management to have, because the person who is the CEO and the president of a corporation is also going to be the person delivering the services. And so they're going to be able to stick a lot more of that money into their pocket. Okay. And how do we do that? Because when you have a company, you have to have a development staff, and you have to have a whole bunch of lawyers, and you have to have a whole bunch of marketing people, and you have to have a whole bunch of this, even before you sell the very first piece of product. We're not going to do that. We're going to use the community to create all of those things for every country, for every state, for every language, for every law firm, and we're going to put it up on the internet so that these people can pull it down and buy the components and put it together, and it will work. Now, you may have to study a little bit ahead of time. That's why we're going to put all this stuff on the internet so that you can study. I'm going to give you a little clue because you've seen the types of systems we're going to have. So look at Kodi, figure out how you can tune it, put it together and stuff. Get information on Odoo. So Odoo is actually 2 things. It is the computer science part, the database part, the graphics part, things like that, but it's also the business part. How do you set up an inventory system? How do you set up, delivery stuff? Those 2 parts, and you can partner with one computer science student and one business administration student to come together to create your Odoo company to deliver this. And one student would go in and take care of the technical part, and one student would go in and take care of the business part and work with the customer in setting up the Odoo system. So a lot of people say, well, maddog, this doesn't sound very capitalistic. And you're right. Capitalism is just only one economic system in the world. It came after feudalism, which was the king owned everything and everybody else was serfs. And there was another one called socialism. And every time I say socialism, there's a large group of people in the far right who say, communism! And no, it's not communism. It is socialism, where a group of people come together for the benefit of everybody. They're working for a common good. And the United States has a lot of socialism. We have socialistic military, we have socialistic public schools, we have socialistic lots of stuff. And they work for the most part. Some of them are terribly underfunded, like schools, and some of them are terribly overfunded, like the military. But nevertheless, for 250 years, for the most part, they have worked. And in state socialism, what a lot of people consider communism, even though it necessarily isn't, that's where the state controls the business. But what we're talking about is democratic socialism. But if I call it by a different name, like employee-owned cooperatives, then people say, oh yeah, I know about those. You know, that's what Land of Lakes is. A whole bunch of dairy farmers and dairies and stuff like that who banded together into an employee-owned cooperative, and you can go to the food store and you can find butter and cheese and stuff like that, that they're working on this together. Another example of that was rural free electricity, or rural electrification program. Because back in the early days, when electricity was first created, the place that electricity came was the city. Because you had all these buildings very close together, it was easy to wire and stuff like that, and the cities had electricity. But the farms did not. The farms were still using kerosene lanterns and stuff, and the farms would burn because the kerosene lanterns would catch on fire. But more importantly, the farms did not have a way of keeping their milk cold. And so they needed to have electricity on the farm to do that. First they did that with generators, but trying to get the electric lines to go out to the farmlands was very, very expensive. Until the government stepped in and said, we're going to help you. We're going to help you design it, we're going to help you fund it, but you have to bear the bulk of the cost, and you're going to do that by forming a cooperative to produce the electricity for you. And my brother and sister-in-law belonged to one of those cooperatives in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And for years, they would go out to they would receive a postcard in the mail, go out to their electric meter, read the numbers of the electric meter, write it down on the postcard and mail it back. And then the company would send them a bill the next month. They'd pay the bill. At the end of the year, they got back a certain dividend paid back to them according to how much electricity they used, because they were the owners of the electric company. If you go to www.coops.tech, you'll find a whole bunch of technical co-ops, including one down in Texas that is owned by the people who work on it. And these people go in and they hire managers to be able to manage the companies. But those managers report to the employees. The employees are in charge. So this is a private ownership. It's not public ownership, it's private ownership, just like capitalism is private ownership. However, the ownership is either of the employees or of the customers. So, if we think about what Linux is really, it is not closed source channels like certain unnamed companies are. Okay? It's where a community of people comes together to develop code that they equally share amongst themselves and they can use to solve their own problems. And they can tailor that code to the customer. Now, I know a lot of you use Linux on your laptops, or your desktops, or things like that, and you just download it and never change it. You just wait for the next release to come out because that's good enough. But if you wanted to, you could change it. If you didn't have the expertise to do it, you could hire somebody to do it. And since I work for LPI, I'm happy to announce that we have 300,000 certified Linux professionals in over 180 different countries. There's only like 2 or 3 countries that we don't have them in because, well, political reasons, let's say that. But that doesn't include Cuba. We have them in Cuba too, because we're headquartered in Toronto. So I'm going to tell you why closed source fails. Years ago, when microcomputers were first coming out, I had a CP/M system. I decided I was going to buy a CAD package. And this was a closed source package generated by a little company very close to my house. It was a company that was in Massachusetts. And they had about 1,000 customers for their CAD package. And they had 20 developers who were developing the code. And I purchased it. It was a very nice little CAD package. But I had a couple problems with it. So one day I showed up at the company. They had a little entryway. There was a little door there. It was like a half door, like you see in a stable. I knocked at it. They opened up this little slot. They said, yes. I said, I have this problem. I sent you an email. Oh, yeah. We got that. Here, install this. You'll be fine. It was great. I had 2 problems. Their 1,000 customers could have 2 problems apiece. That's 2,000 customers for their 20 developers. You know, that's 100 problems to solve in a year. Relatively easy, and a lot of those problems may be the same. Relatively easy to do. However, 2 years later, the company had grown. They now had tens of thousands of customers. You could buy their package for $39.95 or $40 or $34. And they had grown to 500 developers. But if each customer only had 2 problems, they had tens of thousands of problems that they had to manage, they had to solve, and whatever. And they wanted to help, but they couldn't. I've worked for a lot of different companies, Digital Equipment Corporation, SGI, a lot of them, and they're all in the same boat. They want to help, they really do. They take pride in it, but they can't. And these are problems in the software, not even extensions to the software to meet their needs, because that's even worse. And I could go on and on and on of the cost of this problem. But if you're talking about open source and free software, open source is great for developers because you gather together all this bulk of software to make your development faster and better. You can use large portions of software that's been used to other things that have been tested and to put together your solution. But with open source, there's no guarantee that the changes you make are even going to be sent upstream. And there's no guarantee that you're going to make that source code available to your customers. That's because it's a permissive license. And there's only one license that I know of which guarantees that. It's the one that most people call the restrictive license. I happen to think it's more permissive. It's permissive to the customer. And that one forces you to make your source code changes available to the end user customer. And as I said before, not every customer has the expertise to make use of those, but they can hire somebody who can. So for years, we've been told by the big companies that cloud computing is going to make things easy to do. You're not going to need as many systems administrators. Everything goes up into the cloud. It's really nice. And, oh, by the way, you've got all your phones and apps and things like that. And sure, that may treat 90% of the audience. But if you're in that last 10%, you're out of luck, okay? So that's why all these things are both easy and hard. I mean, why would you need Apple stores if it was that easy? How many of you have gone to an Apple store? I mean, I'll give it over to Apple. Apple does a great job at integration stuff. Really wonderful, really wonderful. It's so easy to use Apple. If it was that easy, you wouldn't need Apple stores. You wouldn't need genius stores at Best Buy, genius people, right? My husband is Brazilian. He is also the support person for the greater part of his neighborhood. And he used to try and support them with their Microsoft Windows systems over the telephone. But then he just said, no, you're going to install and use Linux if you want my support. And that's what they do now, the whole neighborhood, because they can't afford, either in time or energy, to get the support for Windows. So what we need is more localized support, more localized sales. The people who actually talk to the customer, go into the customer's site, see what they need. And this type of support is traditionally very expensive to deliver. In Sao Paulo, Brazil, the city is so large, it takes you 4 hours to drive across the city at peak hour. 4 hours to go across and 4 hours to come back. So if you're supplying telephone support to a customer and they say, I still can't get it to work, and you hop in your car and you drive across the city just to find out that their mouse is unplugged, that's a lot of expense, okay? And typically the people on these call telephone lines are overworked, understaffed, undertrained, and that's why you wait so long with the telephone for your help. So what we need to do is to flatten that hierarchy. And so I am about to tell you a management wet dream. It's called a non-salaried, commission-based local sales and support team. In other words, a Project Cowa student. You don't pay them a salary. All the money they make is from sales, commission, going out and selling. And this will allow them to sell really interesting products at a much lower cost than you would think. Because typically, 36% of all software pricing, all software costs, are sales and marketing. And so you can eliminate that from going out to a, quote, sales and marketing team to going into the student's pocket. And the customer will see no change in what they pay. If you're delivering the solution and the maintenance to the customer, then he has no costs other than his time and his or her time and materials. And if they need something that they don't have the knowledge to do, Project Cowa will provide them with the ability to find a solution, either through other people in the Project Cowa community or through going to a next level of paid support from professional commercial support people. Now, I've been working on this for 9 years. We've had many different pilot studies. We've learned a lot. But I now have a time to go forward. And by Linux Fest Northwest on April the 24th, we're going to have the website up. We have all the materials and steps of how to do this. We're going to have legal contracts in at least several different countries, along with advertising materials for each solution written in that country's native language. There'll be a lot more countries that can do this, and we want to do this, but what we're going to do is allow those countries to take and see what we're doing and translate it into their language, their legal support contracts, put it up on the website, and then find mentors for all the students from universities and other places. They will be able to do this themselves without asking anybody's permission. And it will cost them nothing. So we need mentors. On April the 24th, you'll see the website go up. And if you would like to mentor some of these students, lend them your expertise, particularly business expertise, A lot of these students are so shy, they don't think they know anything. Yet they do. They know more than the customer does. And they can find out how to find out what they don't know. So Odoo is the first mainstream thing we're going to do. We have all the hardware that people can order off the internet. And we will put together packages so you can just order one whole thing if you want to. But I would encourage people to order individual things to tailor it better. And we will have a list of VARs in each country that the students could go to if they run into a problem they can't solve. That is actually the end of my talk, which I wasn't going to give, but I did. Now we're going to go into another couple slides. And it has to do with tariffs on computers. There's been a lot of talk in the last couple months about tariffs, and particularly tariffs on things coming in from China. And so I have a suggestion for China and Taiwan. I think you'll like it. Stop shipping all laptops and desktops to the United States with closed source software on it. Instead, put free software. Because the argument given way back when of why you had to install a particular closed source solution on every single laptop and every single desktop was when it went to the retail store, people needed to see that the computer worked. People needed to be able to compare one computer versus the other as far as its efficiency and things like that. And there was no other solution other than a company in Redmond, Washington, to do that with. But it isn't 1994 anymore. We have companies that are selling Linux installed on their laptops. My laptop right here is from Lenovo. And so what you can do is put free software on that laptop and ship it from China or Taiwan to the United States, and the cost of the laptop will be reduced. And that means the cost of the tariff that you pay goes down. And people talk about the tariff, but they don't talk about something else, the sales tax that goes on top of the tariff. So it's not 25% tariff that you're paying anymore, it's actually 30%. So you say, well, geez, how much money could we be talking about here? Well, let's use my laptop here. It's actually about $22 billion a year that a certain closed source software company gets from installed products onto laptops. That's a lot of money. It's approximately, if you average it all out, about $40 per system. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're buying 1,000 systems at a time, it's $40,000 plus the tariff plus the tax. And it's not like I'm saying you can't get Microsoft on that. It's just that when the system comes into the country, it's going to have Linux on it. And they can install Microsoft on there if they want to. It's just it's going to cost them a little bit more. Or they could have a channel partner install that software on there if they want to. But there's a lot of countries around the world that are mandating free software for their government and stuff like that. And I think it is wise for the Chinese government to think about standardizing on free software on every single laptop and every single desktop. There is a group of countries called BRICS. You may have heard of them. Their actual purchasing power is now greater than the purchasing power of the United States and all of our G7 allies. And Europe has actually joined through a side path this BRICS organization. So I bought my Lenovo, I ordered my Lenovo laptop from the web, And I saw in there that not only did they sell with Microsoft, a closed source solution, but they also sold it with Ubuntu and Fedora. It's just that Ubuntu and Fedora would not be available until about a month later, on the same day. I thought that was kind of odd. Ubuntu and Fedora being available on the same day for the laptop? And then I got it, and I realized it's a new kernel that went into both distributions. And not only did Ubuntu and Fedora work on that day, but also Mint, Alma Linux, Debian, okay? Everything worked on the same day. And so we know how this works, don't we? As I said, Microsoft makes about 22 billion US dollars every day from OS licenses installed. Let's be kind. Let's make it only $10 billion on license fees that come from laptops and desktops. But that's about 250 million systems, or on the average, $40 per system. Your 25% tariff generates a lot of money that's just going to the United States government and making it more expensive for United States citizens. And that's without the 5% sales tax. Now, other cost savings, license management costs. You don't have to do as much license management when you're using free software. And so for the Chinese companies and OEMs and distributors and stuff, it's a lot cheaper. And we're just talking about the operating system. If you bundle in a Office package, you bundle in a database engine like Postgres, then you're delivering a lot more functionality for the same cost, non-tariffed cost. Okay. And legal costs also you have to look out for. So, maddog, how I get China to do this? You say this is scale. This is the first time I've talked about this to anybody. How am I going to get China to do this? I have 5,000 people on my Facebook page spread all over the world. I have 300,000 certified developers in 180 countries around the world through LPI. And I have organizations that I can reach out to and say, this is just a suggestion, Mr. Thing. You know? And we'll see what happens. And we'll see how the United States reacts to it. I think that China will see the advantages. And so with that, I'll ask if there's any questions. We have a microphone, if you'd like to utilize that to ask a question. Any comments? It's also available. There's a question in the back.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Really inspiring. Coming back to
Project Kawan?
Sorry?
Project Kawan?
Yes. So I think there's a sort of an elephant in the room about which is AI and how it affects or changes the balance of local versus centralized, where it comes to knowledge workers. So I wonder how you see it affecting your projects.
Well, I think a lot of it depends on the product that you're trying to sell with Project Kawan. There might be a lot more, it might have a lot more effect on something like Udo, which is a business thing, so that the AI would be able to react to the business that you have. Of course, that also makes it easier for the local person to use the AI to be able to tailor the answer to the customer's needs. My finding has been, however, that a lot of times customers have a difficulty in describing exactly what they want. And somebody who has the skill to listen to the customer can then make the query of the AI system to be able to give exactly the answer that is needed. The other problem with AI is it isn't always necessarily correct. It may give you a large leap towards the answer, but somebody really has to check in on it, okay? At least for the next several years that I could think of. Maybe in the future we will have cognizant AI that will be able to more rapidly learn from its own mistakes. Of course, when that happens, I hope that I am dead. Or that somebody has the sense to pull the plug out of the wall. Did I answer your question?
Yes, so you're saying that it lowers the barrier for anyone to give services, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
So basically you're saying it actually helps by lowering the barrier, knowledge barrier, for anyone to give local services.
Well, that too, okay? I mean, so the goal here is not to the goal here is to allow people to deliver services to the customer. Now, the thing is, if you go to a store and you talk to the storekeeper about putting in a new system of some type, they really don't want to know. They don't want to know that they have to have a Wi-Fi system. They don't want to deal with it. They want to sell stuff. So, for example, trick question. I love asking these trick questions. What do people sell in your typical PC store?
Yeah, they sell recommendation of what to buy, right?
No. They sell the same thing that they sell in a food store. They sell the same thing they sell in a shoe store. They sell shelf space. Where you line things up on the shelf, the customer comes in, picks it up, and takes it out. If the customer has to ask you even one question, you're losing money. It used to be years ago when computers were really expensive, you could ask 2 or 3 or 4 questions, and they had trained, knowledgeable people there. But they don't have that anymore. They hide those people back in the Genius Center or something like that. And if you have to ask even one question about that device that's on the shelf, they're losing money. That's why when you go into a food store, all of the high-priced stuff is up front and the milk is in the back. Okay? They're selling shelf space. And that's all that people want to sell, really. So what we're doing is allowing people who have the questions to find the people who can solve their questions locally and not have to wait for somebody to drive the 4 hours across the city to plug in their mouse.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. This project Cowan that you're talking about, that seems, please correct me if I'm wrong, it seems tailored to Latin America?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, well that was the nature of my question then, do you think this model is applicable in the US and outside or only in certain areas?
It is applicable. Over in Europe, there's also a lot of universities that are free of tuition, but there's a lot of people who can't take advantage of it because they can't generate the money to live while they're going to university. It's only, in my estimation, in the United States that our universities are so freaking expensive that most people can't afford to go to them, or if they do, they end up with debts that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. We used to have land-grant universities that were free of charge to citizens of the state. That went the way of the dodo bird when Reagan became governor of California and later president. The University of California system was tuition-free until about 10 years ago. Now, if you try and go to the University of California, Berkeley, it's $15,000 a year. Now you take a single parent who has 2 children, they're making minimum wage, and for the most part, they're making about $15,000 a year. They don't have health insurance. They're taking all that $15,000 a year to pay for their house, their food, and stuff like that. What chance does that student, does that child of them looking out say, oh yeah, I'm going to be able to go to California, the University of California, Berkeley, if it's going to take the entire salary of my parent to pay for the tuition? This is a crime against God. I benefited from a land-grant university, but my friends' children or grandchildren cannot. We have to fix that. Okay, but going on, what if you're not going to university? Does Project Cower still have any use to you? And the answer is yes, because we're to show people how to be able to sell products made up of free software and open hardware, and be able to deliver services, be able to deliver their own company without having to give money out to stockholders who at one time contributed some money to get the company started, but hey, the machinery they bought has rusted away, but they still expect to get their dividend. So the money you make will go into your pocket, not to a stockholder, nothing like that. So yeah, it will have an effect. I don't know what it will be yet, but it will have an effect even in the United States. Yes, sir.
So I had 2 questions. That was my first question. So I'm brilliant, like the kind of grassroots impact of like what a Project Cutout would do in this country. Also, I'll do the second question now. Second question, you got the gears rolling. I think a big impact. I didn't realize the economies of scale when you talk about impact on transitioning these OEMs from China and Taiwan to open source software and having them export with, say, a Linux distribution on thousands and thousands, millions of desktop, laptop computers, server systems and whatnot. So I was just thinking, like, wow, yeah, it's a great point. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now, yeah, the S is South Africa. They have Indonesia on there. I think it's total like 22 countries.
More.
They have like 60% more. They have like 60%, I think, of the productivity base compared in the totality of the world economy, and so economically, it's a huge adversary against the United States and G7. So bottom line, I'd like to know, what is your thought on how do you get the OEMs to transition? What would there be their incentive to move to something from like, let's say closed source just to open source? If they say, well, we can't do that because that wouldn't be viable for our customer base. Do you think that that really the majority of the consumers and really where we'd have to go is convincing governments? Because like say, Latin America, there's been some successful cases like you pointed out, but in Europe, there's been some successful cases too. Spain, France, I think Germany now is a big example. So would it have to be that like G7 plus BRICS, really you have to start to convince the governments, prime consumer of these computing systems, to transition to a open source kind of framework for consumption? Does that have a huge, like, considering economies of scale?
You're making this a little bit too complicated. Okay? First of all, you're talking about a capitalistic country. China isn't that. Okay? The Chinese government could simply say, we're going to stop putting Microsoft on these units. We're going to deliver them either with no operating system or with free software. You have your choice. And then it's going to be up to the places that want to have Microsoft on them to put them on there. Canada has recently made movements or his statements that they're going to cut off the northeast part of the United States from electricity. They're not going to deliver hydro anymore to the states. They've been suffering through some brownouts and stuff because they can't produce enough electricity. So by not delivering it to the United States, they can solve that problem. So we're going into a realm right now. This is new space. And, and it's not that, customers could not get Microsoft or their systems. They could. All they have to do is install it themselves or have some company install it for them. But for everybody else in the world, they're receiving a system with a perfectly viable operating system on it. Now, if certain people in Washington, D.C. want to be more reasonable, then maybe we could go back to status quo. However, I think that a lot of countries outside of the United States would be just as happy with free software. And this doesn't have to happen overnight, but it can happen over time. And we could see in the next couple of years a broad sweep of 4%, 7% desktops into being 90% free software desktops. I hate to say this, but thank you, Mr. Trump. Yes, sir. You, sir, in the back.
So going on with that particular question, what if either the current or the next administration were to pull a C and be like, this free software is a threat to the country, and bans it in the country. They make a presidential order banning free software because they, for some reason, deem it a security threat to the nation. How would we get around that when it comes to this potential solution?
Well, first of all, they could do that anyway. Mm-hmm. And second of all, I really don't care.
Sure.
Because as we just said, the BRICS countries in all is greater than the GDP of the United States and its allies. And if the United States starts doing that, it may even shove more people towards the BRICS initiative, more countries towards the BRICS initiative. I mean, BRICS a few years ago, I saw it coming. And I said, hi, you have to pay attention to this. People laughed at me. Of course, they laughed at me when I was supporting Linux back in 1994. And they laughed at me when I got the Rockridge extensions into the ISO 9660 definition, so we could put Linux and Unix systems onto CD-ROMs and stuff so we could make ISOs. They laughed at me then, too. And they laughed at me when I talked about Unix being a force in the universe back in 1977. They laughed at me. It's okay. I'm used to the laughter. I think they might try and do that, but it's not going to have any effect. I'll give you a different effect. What happens if all of a sudden there is a nuclear warhead that hits Redmond, Washington? How long would it take us to be able to formulate another distribution of Microsoft Windows to send out to everybody? What happens if a horrible disease hits Redmond, Washington, quickly wiping out the entire central engineering force of Microsoft? I don't know. And I don't care. Any other questions? Question down here. Oh, okay.
Hi there, just a quick comment. The last slide said it was about slide 29 out of 48. Are there more slides or is just the typo?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. I'm a little hard of hearing, and so you have your mask on and
Okay, no worries, I'll repeat the question. So the last slide, the question slide, at the bottom right, says it is slide 29 out of 48. Are there more slides?
yes, there are, and those are slides that were kind of left over from the talk last year. So if you go to last year's conference, my speaker page, you'll find a link of the slides and the talk that I gave last year, which goes into much greater depth of what Project Cowan is and how it's going to be implemented and stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. What? How much time do I have? Time's over. All right. Thank you very much for coming.